after so much of the violence of the protests have died down, I think that is like blatantly political. In fact, that polls have him going from 7 points to 8 points to 15 points. Like, it is like, even if the polls are super off, like, he is in big trouble. Yeah, and I mean, so
yes, I do believe they're super off though.
yeah, like I wouldn't subscribe to the idea that they're off by like 3 points, but not like 15 points.
So much more.
And that's where
there are so many. I have so many friends who just won't speak about politics anymore. They just won't talk about it because perhaps they're more libertarian, perhaps they're slightly right of center. And then for them, a clear choice is to vote for Donald Trump. But they don't want to hear the grief and aggravation about how they're racist and they're homophobes and they're everything. They don't want to get canceled. They got too much to lose. So
yeah, but they don't
want to get canceled by their jobs.
But I don't know. I think I think every indication has shown that there has been a mass, like, again, there are, like, I do subscribe to 3 point, like 3 to 5 points of, like, polling difference for, like, really 5, I think is even pushing it. But if you look at the way the polls were last time, like, the national, like, popular vote total was, like, pretty much on. The major differences were in the states, where exactly. That's where the polls were bad. But, I mean, again, I don't think, like, even if he, at this point, was lost in 2 to 3 points on the polls, he would still win by a big amount. I think that's a big reason why these troops are here where they are.
Yeah, like I said, it's a political event.
Yeah, so
unfortunately, there are innocent people living inside all of these cities who are suffering the consequences. I read something like almost half of the arrests are for people from outside the states from where the unrest is happening. It's absurd. So, you know, it just like money pours in from other cities for candidates, people are pouring in now for other candidates.
I mean,
it's the same difference.
I don't necessarily. I think we're seeing the protests like there's footage that's being shown in the media that's like from a long time ago, and I think that's getting certain people to believe that the protests are. I think like really what's happening is a lot of people are just going out there. They're going to their local city march and going home, and like I don't think they're going home. They're holding signs to say even defund the police. They're just saying, I don't know, like, rein in the power of police unions, like I don't know, just kind of very basic reforms. Like that's why this movement has so much broad pull, especially in the wake of George Floyd. Like I kind of look at my dad kind of as an indicator of like where like the acceptable, like the way what's acceptable in political conversation is, and like I think that's been very effective in convincing him and like my mom, because like they're my mom less so, but my dad is kind of I don't know, not a very inherently like super left-wing person, but I think he's been much more kind of changed by this. And I think, again, he's not obviously cheering now the rioting and the looting, but he has definitely moved
but you just
to
hit
the left on
real
this.
Problem, okay? You can be on the side of people who are mistreated by police, and all kinds of people get mistreated by police. Now,
I totally agree.
If you're a black man, just based on the crime rate in your neighborhood, you're going to have more contact with police than someone in a white neighborhood where there's less crime. It's that simple, okay? So, you know, people are having contact with law enforcement, consummate with the crime rates in their areas.
That's where we disagree.
No, but it is true.
But I think it's more.
If you just look at the FBI's uniform crime statistics, it bears that out. Now, I'm not saying that a black guy isn't going to be treated worse once he's now in contact with law enforcement. He probably is.
I think it's more kind of just like more. I think definitely race plays a part of it, but if you are like in an area that's also like poor white people are given a little bit less of a benefit of doubt than if you're in a nicer neighborhood. It's all kind of just like how police like read people, and in a way that's also kind of very biased. And I think it's like everybody reads people. That's just part of life. Like you see someone down the street, you read them. It's a human reaction. But I think that where the big problem is, there is like a culture and power that police have of militarization that leads to, I think, a lot of the problems.
I think their preference is to not do that, to not be militant about crime. I think the biggest victims...
I think that's where we disagree.
The biggest victims of crime in black neighborhoods aren't the black criminals. They're ordinary black people who are living in those neighborhoods. And there was a 1-year-old shot in New York. And by police accounts, maybe half a dozen people knew exactly who did it. And nobody said anything. Because they'd be next. Okay? That's how crime in those really crime-ridden neighborhoods works. There are certain people committing all the crime and everyone else suffering from it.
And do the law enforcement officers not know who the person is, or?
But if you can't prove anything, if you can imagine it's someone,
I mean, they've had no problem searching people. Like they've had no problem just checking people out.
Not in New York City anyway. Not since De Blasio didn't contest the stop and frisk ruling. He could have done that. He could have found middle ground. In fact, Bloomberg himself said, I would have contested it and got something better than what De Blasio has done. Which is to give up.
I think there's a middle ground. Like you can, like there's plenty of other cities where stop and frisk doesn't exist, and still, if there was someone who multiple eyewitnesses said was a deep criminal, the police would say that's more than enough probable cause to go in and search them. I mean, hell, they search people who are like. For a lot less things, they're very aggressive searching people who they think, like in traffic stops. Like there's tons of videos about it. Like we see the way that they behave, and those are not areas where there is stop and frisk. Like there's a middle ground there.
One of the problems is that innocent people are in immediate danger for wanting police to arrest given individuals in a neighborhood. They are in immediate danger because those people wield power in those neighborhoods. They're criminal enterprises. That's just how it works. Generally based around drugs and guns. Mm-hmm. So
yeah, I mean, again, I don't know, but I think it's just if you look at the protests and everything when it comes to that, I think that's what it comes down to, like how people view the protests, and do people really buy what I would argue Trump is in the narrative of what like Trump is largely pushing without much fact behind it, and the right is like Tucker Carlson again just pushing without much fact behind it, is that like, oh, the cities are burning, like there's mass chaos in every American city. I don't know. I think that's really what it'll come down to.
There's violence in Portland every weekend. Okay.
I mean, there's a lot of protests. There's definitely a lot of protests, and I mean, there's violence in cities.
Why?
Yes.
Why do protests have to be violent?
I don't think that a lot of these protests are violent, and that's what people are saying. People like Tucker Carlson
watching
are
frozen
like,
water bottles get thrown at people in.
And again, you have tear gas, you have batons, you have that coming in on people who are just standing there. But
those people wouldn't be using tear gas and batons if they weren't under assault.
No, you can, of course. That's again, cops are like, I'm under assault, and then they'll go in into a crowd of people, someone kneeling and like saying like a speech or whatever, and then just take them off and take them away, like drag them off. Like I don't know. I think cops I'm under assault. Like the fact that there's criminals out there is like there's one criminal. Cops are like, oh, I'm under assault. Like if you're having a situation that looks inherently peaceful, like you can't just be like, oh well, there's violence elsewhere and justify that as an excuse to use violence there.
Inherently peaceful means that there's something in there that's not. And that's what the police have to respond to. And as soon as they do, they are pummeled from other sides. Protesters are... The biggest problem I see with the protests is that state and local officials aren't denouncing the rioters. They're not denouncing the illegality, and they're conflating protesters with rioters, and I'll say this because I know it's true. Protesters are not rioters. I've seen plenty of protests in my neighborhood. Yeah. Okay, they're not rioters. Rioters are rioters. And when they're mixed in with the protesters, it's all the rules are out the window.
I'd probably pay you like all the money in my wallet right here if you walked up to Bill de Blasio and you're like, do you not condemn the rioters and the looters in your city? And he would say, yes. He would clearly say, of course I do. Like, I think that's 100%. Like, I would be willing to bet.
They always manage to say that the police are assaulting peaceful protesters. Police don't assault peaceful protesters.
Mayor, I don't know. That's a very rare thing. They even come out of a Democratic mayor's mouth. Like, I highly doubt that.
Nancy Pelosi, well, people do what they do. We're talking about, people ripping down statues illegally. It's an illegal act. Whether you love the guy who the statue is commemorates or not, it's still illegal. Let's have a town meeting. Let's vote on it. Let's pull them down. Let's get rid of everything we hate communally, not in a riot.
Again, I think like you can't. I don't think you can really equate the thing going on with the statues with people's stores and people's businesses. Like and again, I can't really get worked up about like a statue going down. I think people taking down like the Ulysses S. Grant statue, like the Abraham Lincoln, like that's obviously I don't support that anyway.
That is
like
completely.
And if it's like, unless the people who I support like taking down are like Confederate generals, because in my mind, like if there's a Confederate general or monument to like Confederate war or whatever, like in a public place, that to me is just like a giant like middle finger to every black person walking by.
Yes, you got to realize that some of these things exist. Some of these things exist because they were consolations given to certain people and governments, so that
a lot of them were put up by the outside group, the Daughters of the Confederacy, after the war, because there was support of Southern governments after Reconstruction failed.
Yes, I agree. But let's talk about army bases. Those are also concessions made to southern states so that we could live peaceably. Now, okay, it's outlived its usefulness.
Yes,
fine.
That's fair.
But it can outlive its usefulness in an organized way instead of mayhem and destruction.
And I think a lot of the name changes.
It makes us look at this country like we have absolutely no respect for I'm not talking about the white men who wrote our founding documents. I'm talking about what they say. I'm talking about everyone's created equal, that we have inalienable rights. These things are as true now as they ever were. But because they were written by a bunch of white men, some who owned slaves and some who militated against slaves, right? We can throw the whole thing out. It doesn't make sense.
I think if I see a video of, for example, in the UK, there was a guy who's like a slave. Like one of the first things that started the statue debate was this guy in Bristol, UK. There was a statue of him that was dragged into the river, and he was like one of the most prominent slave traders in the area. Like I thought that, and I was like, that's like very good. That's crazy. They had that like a statue like that up in the first place. But yeah, I think that's like if a statue of those kind of figures,
Yale University was a slave trader. What are we going to do about him now?
Yeah, I mean, but you got Thomas Jefferson. Look at Thomas Jefferson. Like there's some other like factors I think that you have to take into account. There.
Of course, and I'll tell you this: I would never want to be judged by the mob on my worst day, because everyone has their worst day. Everyone has a day where they've done something that they're not proud of, or that may have offended someone, but that isn't the sum total of that person. Okay? So, but you want to cancel me on one day of my life of almost 60 years? It doesn't make sense to me.
And I think you do subscribe. I subscribe to the thing that like you can still like there's a complicated side to like every story. Like you can still judge a Thomas Jefferson for holding slaves, but you can also like consider the fact that like he was instrumental in founding the country, and like that's like he like should be on Mount Rushmore. Personally, I mean, the only person who I have a problem being on Mount Rushmore is Teddy Roosevelt. Personally, I think he's a little overrated. But other than that, I think he's the Elizabeth Warren to Bernie Sanders' Teddy Roosevelt or Franklin Roosevelt, you know. Yeah.
Teddy was that's always been my theory. He's also a complicated guy. You know, he's also sort of responsible for the American Enlightenment. He was big on history, natural parks,
yes,
preserving the ecology of what he imagined was the greatest country on earth, right? So yeah, everyone's complicated.
Yeah, that's true. I definitely say that's fair.